All right, how you guys doing today? We're about to hop into a little reaction. The first things first, though, I'd love to make sure that you like the video, hit a little exit full screen, scroll just a little bit, like the video, and then full screen it back up. You feel me? So, 2 videos ago, we were discussing the nature of slavery in the Bible, specifically from Dr. Frank Turek's point of view, who was referencing a book from Paul Copan. And with this book, was a deep dive on Leviticus chapter 25, which I went out of my way to read because a lot of people in the comments were saying, you're lying to support your beliefs. Some of these people were talking about like they aren't Christian, but they know that I'm lying to support my beliefs, and then some were Christian and saying that it doesn't actually support that. I think is what I inferred from the nature of the comments. I didn't necessarily respond to them yet because I wanted a chance to read Leviticus 25 on my own. And at the beginning of it, it talks mostly about the freeing of the Israelite bondmen or your brethren at the year of Jubilee and all the stuff related to that. And just at the end, like the last maximum 15-20 verses, it talks about the other cultures and how you're allowed to keep them as slaves and pass them along and such. Doesn't necessarily say anything about treating them with what's the word they use, severity, I believe is the word that the King James version used. However, it was specifically noted that the Israelite brethren, if they happen to fall into debt to you and you buy them or whatever the case is, right, you are not to treat them with severity. So it did go to say that, but it didn't necessarily say that you're allowed to or express extreme, you can do that with severity. You know what I'm saying? It didn't necessarily say that. However, it was correlated with a verse from Exodus 1:13, which said that severity was the same type of word. I didn't look at the like Aramaic or the Hebrew, whatever, not Aramaic, but Hebrew or the whatever language to see if it was the exact same word for the severity, but it was cross-referenced with a verse in Exodus to describe how Egypt was treating the Israelites, which means that it was expressly said you are not supposed to treat the Israelites how the Egyptians treated the Israelites. But I believe, I'm going to look at my Bible just to make sure that I'm saying the truth, but I don't think that it said you're not supposed to treat other countries or other nations, people like that. So I'm at Leviticus 25 right now in my actual paper King James Version Bible, verse 42. These are my servants I've brought forth out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as bondmen. We're just going to take a look in the interlinear section here for the word bondmen, because in my Bible, they do like they put a one next to the word and then they'll put it in the column another word for that, right? So for the biggest one in my head is when it says lest, it usually means for fear that, or wherefore is like for which reason, you know. So for bondmen they put slaves. However, we can look at this word ebed, bondmen, and we can take this into another tab here and check out how it's really used, right? And keep in mind, I'm not trying to, close myself off and be narrow-minded, right? I prayed to God before I read the chapter to make sure that, he conveys what he wanted to convey to me, because if I was really spouting some nonsense in the last video, I want that to be known and I want to apologize and be better, right? Because I'm in school for education right now. How can I try to be the best educator I could be if I'm not trying to teach myself in the most integrous way that I can? So we're looking at it here. I'm actually trying to prove myself wrong, because then I can at least say, hey, I was wrong and now I have a better understanding on this, rather than having to tell people I was right, right? I'd rather say I was wrong than say I was right, personally. So we could see the outline of biblical uses. A lot of the times, slave or servant, 744 times as servant, 23 times as manservant, 21 times as bondman, 10 times as bondage, 1 time as bondservant, and one on all sides. I don't really know. But slave, servant, manservant, subjects, servants, worshippers of God, servant in a special sense as prophets, the Levites, servant of Israel, servant from the address between equals. Abed from another word, so we can go check out the derivative, right? But mostly a servant, a bondage, bondman, bondservant, manservant, right? Slave or servant. From all this type of jazz, so many different uses. Slave or a servant of the household, right? And in Leviticus 25:6, this is a slave or a servant of the household, or my bad, manservant, whatever that necessarily means, right? But the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you, for thee, for thy servant, for thy maid, for their hired servant, and for thy stranger that sojourns with thee. And actually, I see here verse 40, but as a hired servant and as a sojourner he shall be with thee, and he shall serve thee until the year of jubilee, then he shall depart. However, in verse 46 it says that everybody else, or my bad, let's go to verse 45. Moreover, of the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them shall ye buy, and of their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, they shall be your possession. And ye shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession. They shall be your bondmen, or in other words, slave or manservant, forever. But over your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule over one another with rigor. That was the word, not severity, but rigor. But they did put the little one next to rigor and say with severity, which is what Egypt ruled over Israel with, right? So to the children of Israel, it says, you shall not rule over them with rigor. It doesn't say that about the people that sojourns with them, but it's just kind of like implied that I guess you could, but Israel, you're not supposed to. The Israelites don't rule over them with rigor, but everybody else, I guess, is supposed fair game. It doesn't necessarily to do that. It just doesn't say to not do that. Right, but anyway, we can continue here. So, amongst who the Hebrews was commonly a slave, and very so frequently a servant of servants, the lowest servant, the name of, and then it kind of stops. Oh, here we go. The name of servant is also applied to a whole people when subject and tributary to another, which is a lot of that, but also servants of a king, ministers, his quarters, courtiers. Let's just look for Leviticus 25 in here. So I couldn't necessarily find Leviticus in this jumble of stuff, right? But let's take a look at the derivative word. So this word for bondman, abed, comes from abed or abad, to serve, to do, till, to serve, and to work, to worship, service, dress, labor, or ear, to work or to serve, labor, work, to do to another, serve by labor, serve as subject, serve to God, Levitical service, whole bunch of different stuff, right? As a primitive word, to root, or my bad, primitive root, to work, by implication, to serve, or till, or causatively enslave, keep in bondage, bondsman, bond service, compel. See, but even the words, right? Keep in bondage, that sounds like slavery. Be bondmen, to make somebody be a bondman, make it sounds like they're just serving you. Bond service, all these types of things. I don't find it coincidence that the mass of translators that took this Bible, the Septuagint or whatever, and translated it into English, translated it 744 times as servant, or in this context as bondmen and bondservants, right? It doesn't say slaves. In fact, this word is never translated as slaves. The one time it's something different is on all sides. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have the connotation of slave, or it can't be spoken to mean slave, right? This doesn't even make sense. It's not even saying that on all sides is doing a thing, but I'm just saying what it says in 25. Now granted, it's been a very, when I mean very long time, like 3+ years since I have actually read through Exodus, Leviticus, like the whole Torah. All right, it's been about 3 years plus. So to the whole greater context of other chapters that may talk about what they can and can't do with their slaves, I'm not familiar off the top of my dome ski, and I don't have the trust to put into videos at this current moment to let them tell me what to believe, right? I just know that based on some of the stuff that I've heard, my stance was that, it's never, you can do whatever you want to your slaves, you can rape them and this and this and that, right? Because I know from the genocidal argument, a lot of people say, well, God condones genocide in the Old Testament. It's like, yes, he does, but not for the reasons you think. It's not just because he says, I don't like these people, wipe them off the face of the earth. It's usually in the sense of, I'm trying to communicate with them. I'm trying to have you guys dominate them so they can see the error of their ways. But before that, it came, go tell these people they're doing something crazy before something bad happens to them. They don't listen. That cycle happens a couple times. Then something bad's got to happen to them. And sometimes it's got to be genocide. Same God that flooded the earth. right? He's the same one that sent prophets and judges and all these different people to bring rain to Israel, and then they turned their back on him and had to get enslaved to learn their lesson, right? His chosen people, he says, y'all ain't listening, putting you on a servitude, slavery, whatever you want to call it. And then another nation does it, and it's, hey, I tried to save you. I outstretched the hand through my chosen people. You've seen time and time again what I can do for my chosen people. You choose not to listen, choose to worship false idols, which my chosen people have done, and then I put them in slavery, and then I refree them again. You see this happening to them. I tried to save you. You didn't want it. I'm getting rid of you. You're defectors. I don't want you here. And he's the bad guy. He's the bad guy because this thing ain't doing what I want it to do. What happens when we have appliances and they don't work the way we're supposed to, We take them to certain people. We say, hey, can you fix this thing? And sometimes you get hit with this thing is too far gone to be fixed, right? You total your car. It's going to cost X amount of dollars, X amount of thousands of dollars to fix it. You can go buy a new car with that price. Sometimes you got to let that car go. I'm not saying that necessarily what he's saying is applicable to today's day and age. Like, Christians aren't going around killing people, but I'm just saying back in that time, in God's mind, that's what was right for him, and that was his plan, and that's what happened. That's what he said to do. That's what that happened. What are we gonna say to that? No, he didn't want to kill those people. Like, he clearly, if he wanted genocide, he got it. You know what I'm saying? What are you gonna say to God? No, they did that a lot of times, and look what happened to him. So. Like I said, it's been 3+ years since I done read these. Maybe this will be my wake-up call to reread all of Leviticus, right? Can't be that long of a book, right? I just remember I looked at chapter 13, and it was just, if this guy does this, he's unclean, put him out of the camp. If this happens, if the scab is this deep, if hairs are coming out of the scab, he's clean again. If he did the bath in the 7 days, he's clean again. And I was just like, oh yeah, I remember reading that. And he just sitting there like, oh man, look at all the ways people could be clean or unclean. It's about 40 pages, the book of Leviticus is, with the 4 columns of the Bible thing. So maybe I'll reread it, and then I'll come back to you guys with another update video. But until then, what I'm saying, do some research, right? I'm not saying that I'm right, and I'm not saying that, it wasn't chattel slavery, to use the word that my commenters have been using, right? I can't say it's not chattel slavery, but I will say 744 times is servants and bondmen and bondages and bondservants and manservants, and not once as slaves. But the biblical usage, and in terms of probably like what it means, you could put slave here, but I'm just saying, if all those translators put it as servant and not as slaves, maybe the word slave wasn't used then, but this was the 1400s, so I bet it was. But who knows? Let me know what y'all think about it down in the comments. Like I said, whatever the truth is what I'm seeking. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I'll own that. But from what I see right now, it's just, his word against some commenters' word. Because nobody in the comments ever actually drops, like, any verses with any specific, like, here's this verse that says they can do this, this, and that. It's always just like, it's chattel slavery, you're a liar, you're twisting God's word. Like, gang, when has that ever been an applicable thing to do? When you're trying to prove a point, it's just saying what things are, right? It's usually you come with some level of evidence. Like, if I'm talking about things, when you guys hear me talk about stuff, you hear me talk about a verse, you hear me talking about the literal Hebrew translations to the words. You don't just hear me say, man, the Bible says this, this, and that. Like, yeah, you can take my word for it, but what did we just talk about literally in the last video, right? I'm not talking about the video before about this topic. I'm talking about literal last video. We talked about don't twist God's words unless you be found a liar and all that stuff. Because why would you do that? Come in with some verses. If you're just calling me a liar but not providing any verses for yourself, who's to say you're not the liar, right? And I'm not too above being called a liar, but like, if you're not coming with evidence, what am I supposed to say to you? Oh, my bad, gang. I'm just gonna take your word for it, and you're right. Even though you're not a Christian, I'm gonna take your word about the Bible. You with no credentials, no verses brought up, and you don't believe? Yeah, I'm gonna take your word, sure. But let me know what y'all think in the comments. That's it for me. Alright, that's gonna be the end of the video. Hope you guys have yourself a fantastic rest of your day. Peace.